Welcome, crew, guys, gals, girls, friends, fiends, foes, whoever may be listening beyond the omniverse tonight. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, October 22nd, Monday, October 21st, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight at a far distance or elevation of 6,900 feet. If you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us on We Are Paradox Media under Spreaker, as well as Twitter. If you want to watch live, you can watch us on Facebook under my own name, Tessa and Thomas Peterson, or you could check us out on YouTube. If you don't mind, mosey on over there, give us a like, please follow, subscribe, leave any comments, whether good or bad, etc. You can also find us live tonight on eTalk Radio, which you can find at etalk.tv/radio. And they've been doing a Halloween marathon over there. So it's been 2 full days of epic shows. So I think you guys have enjoyed. Hope you have enjoyed. If you want to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, please go on over to our Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, Podvine. Basically, anywhere you want to listen to your podcast is where you can find us. So tonight, we are doing Storytime with me, TessaTNT. Last night, we had a guest on, Mr. Adrian Bledsoe. Hey, Truzido, great to see you. And that was pretty epic. It was his radio debut, aka podcast debut, and he did a very, very good job. Nice to see you guys there. We got Truzido over there on Twitch. We got somebody over here on Facebook too. I think I need to open that up on my phone because I cannot see any comments over there through the StreamYards. I'll go ahead and open that on up. That way I don't miss any comments from my listeners. All 3 comments so far. Oh. Don't mind being. We got Robert White on the Facebook. He said there was no audio at first. And I don't know why, earlier when I was testing it out, it was showing over here that the sound was working as far as music, but I didn't see it bouncing during the intro, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. Let me check my sound settings really quick over here. Maybe it's something to do with the audio. Stereo audio. I'm not sure. Okay, I think it's working now. It's weird. This StreamYard is a bit finicky. Turn this fan off. You may not be able to hear it, but it's pretty loud over here. So yeah, we did story time last night as well. After we had Adrian on, we had some callers call in. One was particularly rude, and I ended up just taking everybody off the screen. But I didn't hang up on them. They just ended up jumping out on their own. But yeah, we'll be giving out the number and the link to StreamYard later on after we do a bit of story time. The last hour last night, I shared the first portion of my life, sort of those stories. And then we'll be doing that the third hour, and I'll share the link and the number so you guys can call in with your very own ghost stories, which I'd love to hear. Robert Cornell. All right, Robert, calm yourself. Okay, so we've been reading from Alfred Hitchcock's Monster Museum. It's been quite good. First one was on dragons, the Day of the Dragon, where this scientist had actually done something to alligators that caused their heart rate to increase, and then they eventually started growing wings and became dragons. That was a pretty interesting story. I charged this earbud. I've been using it all day. The next story is The King of Cats. This is by Stephen Vincent Benet. But my dear, said Mrs. Culverin with a tiny gasp, you can't actually mean a tail. Mrs. Dingle nodded impressively. Exactly. I've seen him twice. Paris, of course, and then a command appearance at Rome. We were in the royal box. He conducted. My dear, you've never heard of such effects from an orchestra? My dear, she hesitated slightly. He conducted with it? How perfectly fascinating. Too horrid for words, said Mrs. Culverin in a dazed but greedy voice. We must have him to dinner. As soon as he comes over, he is coming over, isn't he? The 12th, said Mrs. Dingle, with a gleam in her eyes. The new symphony people have asked him to be guest conductor for 3 special concerts. We do hope you can dine with us some night while he's here. He'll be very busy, of course, but he's promised to give us what time he can spare. Oh, thank you, dear, said Mrs. Culverin, abstractly, her last raid upon Mrs. Dingle's pet British novelist still fresh in her mind. You're always so delightfully hospitable, but you mustn't wear yourself out. The rest of us must do our part. I know Henry and myself would be only too glad to. That's very sweet of you, darling. Mrs. Dingle also remembered the larceny of the British novelist. But we're just going to give Monsieur Tybalt, sweet name, isn't it? They say he's descendant from the Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, and that's why he doesn't like Shakespeare. We're just going to give Monsieur Tybalt the simplest sort of time, a little reception after his first concert, perhaps. He hates. She looked around the table, large mixed parties, and then, of course, his little idiosyncrasy. She coughed delicately. It makes him feel a trifle shy with strangers. What I don't understand yet, Aunt Emily, said Tommy Brooks, Mrs. Dingle's nephew. Do you really mean this Tybalt bozo has a tail, like a monkey and everything? Tommy, dear, said Mrs. Culverin, crushingly, in the first place, Monsieur Tybalt is not a bozo. He's a very distinguished musician, the finest conductor in Europe. And in the second place, he has, Mrs. Dingle was firm, he has a tail. He conducts with it. Oh, but honestly, said Tommy, his ears pinkening, I mean, of course, if you say so, Aunt Emily, I'm sure he has, but still it sounds pretty steep, if you know what I mean. How about it, Professor Tato? Professor Tato cleared his throat. He said, putting his fingertips together cautiously. I shall be very anxious to see this Monsieur Tybalt. For myself, I have never observed a genuine specimen of Homo caudatus. So I should be inclined to doubt, and yet, in the Middle Ages, for instance, the belief in men are tailed or with caudal appendages or of some sort was both widespread and, as far as we can gather, well-founded. As late as the 18th century, a Dutch sea captain with some character for veracity recounts the discovery of a pair of such creatures in the islands of Formosa. They were in a low state of civilization, I believe, but the appendages in question were quite distinct. And in 1860, Dr. Grimbook, the English surgeon, claims to have treated no less than 3 African natives with short but evident tails. It's got a little picture here of a cat in a composer's outfit. Hello, Julia. Thoreau's testimony rests upon his unsupported word. After all, the thing is not possible, though doubtless unusual. Web feet, rudimentary gills, these occur with some frequency. The appendage we have with us always. The chain of our descent from the ape-like form is by no means complete. I'm doing good. Just reading some stories to the peeps. For that matter, he beamed around the table, what can we call the last few vertebrae of the normal spine but the beginnings of a concealed and rudimentary tail? Oh, yes, it is possible, quite, that in an extraordinary case, a reversion to type, a survival, though, of course. I told you so, said Mrs. Dingle triumphantly. Isn't it fascinating, isn't it, Princess? The Princess Vivracanardus eyes, blue as a field of larkspur, fathomless as the center of heaven, rested lightly for a moment on Mrs. Dingle's excited countenance. Very fascinating, she said in a voice like stroked golden velvet. I should like very much to meet this Monsieur Tybalt. Well, I hope he breaks his neck, said Tommy Brooks under his breath, but nobody ever paid much attention to Tommy. Nevertheless, as the time for Mr. Tybalt's arrival in these states drew nearer and nearer, people in general began to wonder whether the princess had spoken quite truthfully, for there was no doubt of the fact that, up till then, she had been the unique sensation of the season, and you know what social lions and lionesses are. It was, if you remember, a Siamese season, and genuine Siamese were at quite as much of a premium as Russian accents had been in the quaint old days when the chauve-souris was a novelty. The Siamese Art Theater, imported at terrific expense, was playing to packed houses. Rashupska, an epic novel of Siamese farm life in 19 closely printed volumes, had just been awarded the Nobel Prize. Prominent pet and newt dealers reported no cessation in the appalling demand for Siamese cats. And upon the crest of the wave of interest in things Siamese, the Princess Vivracanarda poised with the elegant nonchalance of a Hawaiian water baby upon its surfboard. She was indispensable. She was incomparable. She was everywhere. Youthful, enormously wealthy, allied on one hand to royal family of Siam, and on the other to the Cabots, and yet with the first 18 of her 21 years shrouded from speculation in a golden zone of mystery. The mingling of races in her had produced an exotic beauty as distinguished as it was strange. She moved with a feline, effortless grace, and her skin was as if it had been gently powdered with tiny grains of the purest gold. Yet the blueness of her eyes, set just a trifle slantingly, was as pure and startling as the sea on the rocks of Maine. Her brown hair fell to her knees. She had been offered extraordinary sums by the Master Barbers' Protective Association to have it shingled. Straight as a waterfall tumbling over brown rocks, it had a vague perfume of sandalwood and suave spices, and held tints of rust and the sun. She did not talk very much, but then she did not have to. Her voice had an odd, small, melodious huskiness that haunted the mind. She lived alone and was reputed to be very lazy. At least it was known that she slept during most of the day. But at night she bloomed like a moonflower, and a depth came into her eyes. It was no wonder that Tommy Brooks fell in love with her. The wonder was that she let him. There was nothing exotic or distinguished about Tommy. He was just one of those pleasant, normal young men who seemed created to carry on the bond business by reading the newspapers and the university club during most of the day, and can always be relied upon at night to fill an unexpected hole in a dinner party. It is true that the princess could hardly be said to do more than tolerate any of her suitors. No one had ever seen those aloofly arrogant eyes enliven at the entrance of any male. But she seemed to be able to tolerate Tommy a little more than the rest, and that young man's infatuated daydreams were beginning to be beset by smart solitaires and imaginary apartments on Park Avenue. when the famous M. Tybalt conducted his first concert at Carnegie Hall. Tommy Brooks sat beside the princess. The eyes he turned upon her were eyes of longing and love, but her face was as impassive as a mask, and the only remark she made during the preliminary bustlings was that there seemed to be a number of people in the audience. But Tommy was relieved, if anything, to find her even a little more aloof than usual. Ever since Mrs. Culverin's dinner party, a vague disquiet as to the possible impression which this Tybalt creature might make upon her had been growing in his mind. It shows his devotion that he was present at all, to a man whose simple Princetonian nature found in just a little love, a little kiss, the quintessence of musical art, and the average symphony was a positive torture, and he looked forward to the evening's program itself with a grim, brave smile. Said Mrs. Dingle breathlessly. "He's coming." It seemed to be startled, and it startled Tommy as if he were suddenly back in the trenches under a heavy barrage, as M. Tybalt made his entrance to a perfect bombardment of applause. Then the enthusiastic noise was sliced off in the middle, and a gasp took its place. A vast windy sigh, as if every person in that multitude had suddenly said, "Ah," for the papers had not lied about him. The tale was there. They called him theatric. How well he understood the uses of theatricism. Dressed in unrivaled and unrelieved black from head to toe, the black dress shirt had been a special token of Mussolini's esteem. He did not walk on, he strolled leisurely, easily, aloofly, the famous tail curled nonchalantly about one wrist. A suave black panther lounging through a summer garden with that little mysterious weave of the head that panthers have when they had behind bars, the glittering darkness of his eyes unmoved by any surprise or elation. He nodded twice in regal acknowledgment as the clapping reached an apogee of frenzy. To Tommy, there was something dreadfully reminiscent of the princess in the way he nodded. Then he turned to his orchestra. A second and louder gasp went up from the audience at this point, for as he turned, the tip of that incredible tail twined with dainty carelessness into some hidden pocket and produced a black baton. Tommy did not even notice. He was looking at the princess instead. She had not even bothered to clap at first, but now he had never seen her moved like this. Never. She was not applauding. Her hands were clenched in her lap, but her whole body was rigid as a steel bar, and the blue flowers of her eyes were bent upon the figure of M. Tybalt in a terrible concentration. The pose of her entire figure was so still and intense that for an instant Tommy had the lunatic idea that any moment she might leap from her seat beside him as lightly as a moth and land with no sound at M. Tybalt's side to rub her proud head against his coat and work. Even Mrs. Dingle would notice in a moment. "Princess," he said in a horrified whisper. "Princess." Slowly the tightness and tenseness of her body relaxed. Her eyes veiled again, and she grew calm. "Yes, Tommy," she said in her usual voice, but there was still something about her. "Nothing, only, he's starting," said Tommy. "Hi, Johnny." As M. Tybalt, his hands loosely clasped before him, turned and faced the audience. His eyes dropped, his tail switched once impressively, then gave 3 little preliminary taps with his baton on the floor. Seldom has Gluck's overturn to Iphigenie in Aulis received such an ovation, but it was not until the 8th Symphony that the hysteria of the audience reached its climax. Never before had the new symphony played so superbly, and certainly never before had it been led with such genius. 3 prominent conductors in the audience were sobbing with a despairing admiration of envious children toward the close, and one at least was heard to offer wildly $10,000 to a well-known facial surgeon there present for a shred of evidence that tells of some variety could by any stretch of science be grafted upon a normally decadent form. There's no doubt about it, no mortal hand and arm, be they ever so dexterous, could combine the delicate elan and powerful grace displayed in every gesture of M. Tybalt's tail. A sable staff dominated the brasses like a flicker of black lightning. An ebon, elusive whip that drew the last exquisite breath of melody from the woodwinds and ruled the stormy strings like a magician's rod. M. Tybalt bowed and bowed again. Roar after roar of frenzied admiration shook the hall to its foundations. And when he finally staggered, exhausted from the platform, the president of the Wednesday Sonata Club was only restrained by force from flinging her $90,000 string of pearls after him in an excess of aesthetic appreciation. New York had come and seen, and New York was conquered. Mrs. Dingle was immediately besieged by reporters, and Tommy Brooks looked forward to the little party at which he was to meet the new hero of the hour with feelings only a little less lugubrious than those that would have come to him just before taking a seat in the electric chair. The meeting between his princess and M. Tybalt was worse and better than he expected. Better because, after all, they did not say much to each other, and worse because it seemed to him, somehow, that some curious kinship of mind between them made words unnecessary. They were certainly the most distinguished-looking couple in the room, as he bent over her hand. So darlingly foreign, both of them, and yet so different, babbled Mrs. Dingle, that Tommy couldn't agree. They were different, yes. The dark, lithe stranger, with the bizarre appendage tucked carelessly in his pocket, and the blue-eyed, brown-haired girl. But that difference only accentuated what they had in common. Something in the way they moved, in the suavity of their gestures, in the set of their eyes. Something deeper, even, than race. He tried to puzzle it out, then looking around at the others, he had a rush of revelation. It was as if the couple were foreign indeed, not only to New York, but to all common humanity, as if they were polite guests from a different star. Tommy did not have a very happy evening on the whole, but his mind worked slowly, and it was not until much later that the mad suspicion came upon him in full force. Perhaps he's not to be blamed for his lack of immediate comprehension. The next few weeks were weeks of bewildered misery for him. It was not that the princess's attitude toward him had changed. She was just as tolerant of him as before. But M. Tybalt was always there. He had a faculty of appearing as out of thin air. He walked, for all his height, as lightly as a butterfly of thin air. And Tommy grew to hate the faintest shuffle on the carpet that announced his presence. And then, hang it all, the man was so smooth, so infernally, unruffably smooth. He was never out of temper, never embarrassed. He treated Tommy with extreme of urbanity, and yet his eyes mocked deep down, and Tommy could do nothing. And gradually the princess became more and more drawn to this stranger. In a soundless communion, found little need for speech, and that, too, Tommy saw and hated, and that, too, he could not mend. He began to be haunted not only by M. Tybalt in the flesh, but by M. Tybalt in the spirit. He slept badly, and when he slept he dreamed of M. Tybalt, a man no longer but a shadow, a spectre, the limber ghost of an animal whose words came purringly between sharp little pointed teeth. There was certainly something odd about the whole shape of the fellow, his fluid ease, the mold of his head, even the cut of his fingernails. But just what it was escaped Tommy's intensest cogitation. And when he did put his finger on it, at length, at first he refused to believe. A pair of petty incidents decided him, finally, against all reason. He had gone to Mrs. Dingle's one winter afternoon hoping to find the princess. She was out with his aunt, but was expected back for tea, and he wandered idly into the library to wait. He was just about to switch on the lights, for the library was always dark even in summer, when he heard a sound of light breathing that seemed to come from the leather couch in the corner. He approached it cautiously and dimly made out the form of M. Tybalt, curled up on the couch, peacefully asleep. The sight annoyed Tommy so that he swore under his breath and was back near the door on his way out, when the feeling we all know and hate, the feeling that eyes we cannot see are watching us, arrested him. He turned back. M. Tybalt had not moved a muscle of his body to all appearance, but his eyes were open now. "Welcome back, Robert." And those eyes were black and human no longer. They were green. Tommy could have sworn it, and he could have sworn that they had no bottom and gleamed like little emeralds in the dark. It only lasted a moment, for Tommy pressed the light button automatically, and there was M. Tybalt, his normal self, yawning a little but urbanely apologetic. But it gave Tommy time to think, nor did what happened a trifle later increase his peace of mind. They lit a fire and were talking in front of it. By now, Tommy hated M. Tybalt so thoroughly that he felt that odd yearning for his company that often occurs in such cases. M. Tybalt was telling some anecdote, and Tommy was hating him worse than ever for basking with such obvious enjoyment in the heat of the flames and the ripple of his own voice. Then they heard the street door open, and M. Tybalt jumped up, and jumping, caught one sock in the sharp corner of the brass fire rail, and tore it open in a jagged flap. Tommy looked down mechanically at the tear, a second's glance, but enough, for M. Tybalt, for the first time in Tommy's experience, lost his temper completely. He swore violently in some spitting foreign tongue. His face distorted suddenly. He clapped his hand over his sock, then glaring ferociously at Tommy, he fairly sprang from the room, and Tommy could hear him scaling the stairs in long, agile bounds. Tommy sank into a chair, careless for once of the fact that he heard the princess's light laugh in the hall. He didn't want to see the princess. He didn't want to see anybody. Yet something revealed when M. Tybalt had torn that hole in his sock, and it was not the skin of a man. Tommy had caught a glimpse of black plush, black velvet, and then had come Mr. Tybalt's sudden explosion of fury. Good Lord, did the man wear black velvet stockings under his ordinary socks? Or could he? Could he? But here Tommy housed his fevered head in his hands. He went to Professor Tato that evening with a series of hypothetical questions, but as he did not dare confide his real suspicions to the professor, the hypothetical answers he received served only to confuse him the more. Then he thought of Billy Strange. Billy was a good sort, and his mind had a turn for the bizarre. Billy might be able to help. He couldn't get a hold of Billy for 3 days, and lived through the interval in a fever of impatience. But finally they had dinner together at Billy's apartment, where his queer books were. Tommy was able to blurt out the whole disordered jumble of his suspicions. He was part of Alanis Morissette, Black Velvet. I don't think she sang that song. That was somebody else, I believe. What was her name? I'll have to look it up. Billy listened without interruption until Tommy was quite through. Then he pulled at his pipe. "But, my dear man," he said protestingly. "Oh, I know," said Tommy, and waved his hands. "I know, I'm crazy. You didn't tell me that. But I tell you, the man's a cat all the same. No, I don't see how he could be, but he is. Why, hang it. In the first place, everybody knows he's got a tail." "Even so," said Billy, puffing. "Oh, my dear Tommy, I don't doubt you saw, or think you saw, everything you say. But even so, He shook his head. But what about those other birds, werewolves and things, said Tommy. Billy looked dubious. Well, he admitted, you got me there, of course. At least a tailed man is possible, and the yarns about werewolves go back far enough so that, well, I wouldn't say there aren't or haven't been werewolves. Then I'm willing to believe more things than most people. But a were-cat? Or a man that's a cat and a cat that's a man? Honestly, Tommy. If I don't get some real evidence, I'll go clean off my hinge. For heaven's sake, something to do. Let me think, said Billy. First, you're piss sure this man is? A cat, yeah, said Tommy. Nodded violently. Check, and second, if it doesn't hurt your feelings, Tommy, you're afraid this girl you're in love with has, at least a streak of felinity in her, and so she's drawn to him? Oh, Lord, Billy, if I only knew. Well, suppose she really is, would you still be keen on her? I'd know if she turned into a dragon every Wednesday, said Tommy fervently. Billy smiled. He said. Then the obvious thing to do is to get rid of this imp. Let me think. He thought about 2 pipes full while Tommy sat on pins and needles. Then finally he burst out laughing. What's so darny? Said Tommy, aggrievedly. Nothing, Tommy, only I've just thought of a stunt. Something so blooming crazy, but if he is, what you think he is, it might work. And going to the bookcase, he took down a book. If you think you're going to quiet my nerves by reading me a bedtime story, shut up, Tommy, and listen to this. If you really want to get rid of your feline friend. What is it? Book of Agnes Reppliers, about cats. Listen. There's also a Scandinavian version of the ever-famous story which Sir Walter Scott told to Washington Irving, which Monk Lewis told to Shelley, which in one form or another we find embodied in the folklore of every land. Now, Tommy, pay attention. The story of the traveler who saw within a ruined abbey a procession of cats, lowering into a grave a little coffin with a crown upon it. Filled with horror, he hastened from the spot. But when he had reached his destination, he could not forbear relating to a friend the wonder he had seen. Scarcely had the tale been told when his friend's cat, who lay curled up tranquilly by the fire, sprang to its feet, cried out, "And I am the king of cats," and disappeared and up the chimney. Well, said Billy, shutting the book. By gum, said Tommy, staring. By gum, do you think there's a chance? I think both in the booby hatch, but if you want to try it, I'll spring it on him, and next time I see him, but listen, I can't make it a ruined abbey. I'll use your imagination, make it Central Park, anywhere. Tell it as if it happened to you, seeing the funeral procession and all that. You can lead into it somehow, let's see, some general line. Oh yes. Strange, isn't it? How fact so often copies fiction. Why, only yesterday. See? Strange, isn't it? How fact so often copies fiction, repeated Tommy dutifully. Why, only yesterday. I happened to be strolling through Central Park when I saw something very odd. I happened to be strolling through Here, give me that book, said Tommy. I want to learn the rest of it by heart. Mrs. Dingle's farewell dinner to the famous Monsieur Thibault on the occasion of his departure for his western tour was looked forward to with the greatest expectations. Not only would everybody be there, including the Princess Vivekananda, but Mrs. Dingle, I hinter, if there ever was one, let it be known that at this dinner an announcement of very unusual interest to society might be made. So everyone, for once, was almost on time, except for Tommy. He was at least 15 minutes early, for he wanted to have the speech with his aunt alone. Unfortunately, however, he had hardly taken off his overcoat when she whispered some news in his ear so rapidly that he found it difficult to understand a word of it. And you mustn't breathe it to a soul, she ended, beaming. That is not before the announcement. I think we'll have that with a salad. People never pay very much attention to salad. Breathe what, Aunt Emily? Said Tommy, confused. The princess, darling, the dear princess, and Monsieur Tybalt. They just got engaged this afternoon, dear things. Isn't it fascinating? Yeah, said Tommy, and started to walk blindly through the nearest door. His aunt restrained him. Not there, dear, not in the library. You can congratulate them later. They're just having a sweet little moment alone there now. And she turned away to Harry the butler, leaving Tommy stunned. But his chin came up after a moment. He wasn't beaten yet. Strange, isn't it, how often fact copies fiction, he repeated to himself, in dull mnemonics, and, as he did so, he shook his fist at the library door. Mrs. Dingle was wrong as usual. The princess and Mr. Tybalt were not in the library. They were in the conservatory, as Tommy discovered when he wandered aimlessly past the glass doors. He didn't mean to look, and after a second he turned away, but that second was enough. Tybalt was seated in a chair, and she was crouched on a stool at his side, while his hands softly, smoothly stroked her brown hair. Black cat and Siamese kitten. Her face was hidden from Tommy, but he could see Tybalt's face, and he could hear. They were not talking, but there was a sound between them, a warm and contented sound like the murmur of giant bees in a hollow tree. A golden musical rumble, deep-throated, that came from Tybalt's lips and was answered by hers, a golden purr. Tommy found himself back in the drawing-room, shaking hands with Mrs. Culverin, who said frankly that she had seldom seen him look so pale. The first two courses of the dinner passed Tommy like dreams. The Mrs. Dingle cellar was notable, and by the middle of the meat course he began to come to himself. He had only one resolve now. For the next few moments he tried desperately to break into the conversation, but Mrs. Dingle was talking, and even Gabriel will have a time into Mrs. Dingle. At last, though, she paused for breath, and Tommy saw his chance. Speaking of that, said Tommy piercingly, without knowing in the least what he was referring to. Speaking of that, as I was saying, said Professor Tato, but Tommy would not yield. The plates were being taken away. It was time for salad. Speaking of that, he said again so loudly and strangely that Mrs. Culverin jumped, and an awkward hush fell over the table. Strange, isn't it? How often fact copies fiction? There he was started. His voice rose even higher. Why, only today I was strolling through, and the word for word he repeated his lesson. He could see Tybalt's eyes glowing at him as he described the funeral. He could see the princess tense. He could not have said what he had expected might happen when he came to the end, but it was not bored silence everywhere, to be followed by Mrs. Dingle's acrid. Well, Tommy, is that quite all? We could have grew dingleberries. I don't know, Robert. He slumped back in his chair, sick at heart. He was a foul, and his last resource had failed. Dimly he heard his aunt's voice saying, "Well, then," and realized that she was about to make the fatal announcement. But just then, Monsieur Tybalt spoke. "One moment, Mrs. Dingle," he said with extreme politeness. And she was silent. He turned to Tommy. "You are positive, I suppose, of what you saw this afternoon, Brooks?" he said in tones of light mockery. "Absolutely," said Tommy sullenly. "Do you think I'd—" "Oh, no, Monsieur Tybalt waved the implication aside, but such an interesting story. One likes to be sure of the details, and of course you are sure, quite sure, that the kind of crown you describe was on the coffin?" "Of course," said Tommy, wondering, "but—" "Then I'm the king of the cats," cried Monsieur Tybalt in a voice of thunder, and, even as he cried it, the house lights blinked. There was the soft thud of an explosion that seemed muffled in the cotton wool from a minstrel gallery, and the scene was lit for a second by an obliterating and painful burst of light that vanished in an instant and was succeeded by heavy blinding clouds of white pungent smoke. "Oh, those horrid photographers," came Mrs. Dingle's voice in a melodious wail. "I told them not to make the flashlight picture till dinner was over, and now they've taken it just as I was nibbling lettuce." Someone tittered a little nervously. Someone coughed, and gradually the bells of smoke dislimed, and the green and black spots in front of Tommy's eyes died away. They were blinking at each other like people who have just come out of a cave into a brilliant sun. Even yet their eyes stung with the fierceness of that abrupt illumination, and Tommy found it hard to make out the faces across the table from him. Mrs. Dingle took command of the half-blinded company with her accustomed poise. She rose, glass in hand. "And now, dear friends," she said in a clear voice, "I'm sure all of us are very happy to." Then she stopped, open-mouthed, an expression of incredulous horror on her features. The lifted glass began to spill its contents on the tablecloth in a little stream of amber. As she spoke, she had turned directly to Monsieur Thibault's place at the table, and Monsieur Thibault was no longer there. Some say there was a bursting flash of fire that disappeared up the chimney. Some say it was a giant cat that leaped through the window at a bound, without breaking the glass. Professor Tateau puts it down to a mysterious chemical disturbance operating only over M. Thibault's chair. The butler, who is pious, believes the devil in person flew away with him, and Mrs. Dingle hesitates between witchcraft and a malicious ectoplasm, dematerialization on the wrong cosmic plane. But be that as it may, one thing is certain. In the instant of fictive darkness which followed the glare of the flashlight, Monsieur Thibault, the great conductor, disappeared forever from mortal sight, tell and all. Mrs. Culverin swears he was an international burglar, and that she was just about to unmask him when he slipped away under the cover of flashlight smoke. But no one else who sat at the historic dinner table believes her. No, there are no sound explanations, but Tommy thinks he knows, and he will never be able to pass a cat again without wondering. Mrs. Tommy is quite of her husband's mind regarding cats. She was Gretchen Woolwine of Chicago, for Tommy told her his whole story, and while she doesn't believe a great deal of it, there's no doubt in her heart that one person concerned in the affair was a perfect cat. Doubtless, it would have been more romantic to relate how Tommy's daring finale won him his princess, but, unfortunately, it would not be veracious. For the princess, Vivekananda, also is with us no longer. Her nerves shattered by the spectacular denouement of Mrs. Dingle's dinner required a sea voyage, and from that voyage she was never returned to America. Of course, there are the usual stories one hears of her: a nun in a Siamese convent, or a masked dancer at Le Jardin des Massacres or Sour. One hears that she has been murdered in Patagonia or married in Trebizond. As far as can be ascertained, not one of these gaudy fables has the slightest basis of fact. I believe that Tommy, in his heart of hearts, is quite convinced that the sea voyage was only a pretext, and that by some unheard of means she has managed to rejoin the formidable Monsieur Thibault, wherever in the world of the visible or invisible he may be. In fact, that in some ruined city or subterranean palace they reign together now, king and queen of all the mysterious kingdom of cats. But that, of course, is quite impossible. Ooh, the next one is called Slime. Sounds nasty. Mrs. Dingle and her dingleberries. Freaking Robert. You're crazy, Robert. Mrs. Dingle and her dingleberries. Looks like Trudeau might still be there. I'm not quite sure. So, I don't know. I'm thinking we can start the story and then pick it up again after the break. I was just going to go to break right now, but we'll start it. And then we'll continue next hour. This one is Slime by Joseph Payne Brennan. It was a great gray-black hood of horror moving over the floor of the sea. It slid through the soft ooze like a monstrous mantle of slime obscenely animated with questing life. It was by turns viscid and fluid. At times it flattened out and flowed through the carpet of mud like an inky pool. Occasionally it paused, seeming to shrink in upon itself, and reared up out of the ooze until it resembled an irregular cone or a gigantic hood. Although it possessed no eyes, it had a marvelously developed sense of touch, and it possessed a sensitivity to minute vibrations, which was almost akin to telepathy. It was plastic, essentially shapeless. It could shoot out long tentacles until it bore a resemblance to a nightmare squid or a huge starfish. It could retract itself into a round flattened disc or squeeze into an irregular hunched shape, so that it looked like a black boulder sunk in the bottom of the sea. It had prowled the black water endlessly. It had been formed when the earth and the seas were young. It was almost as old as the ocean itself. It moved through a night which had no beginning and no dissolution. The Black Sea basin, where it lurked, had been dark since the world began, environment only a little less inimical than the stupendous gulfs of interplanetary space. It was animated by a single, unceasing, never-satisfied drive, a voracious, insatiable hunger. It could survive for months without food, but minutes after eating, it was as ravenous as ever. Its appetite was appalling and incalculable. On the icy, ink-black floor of the sea, the battle of survival was savage, hideous, and usually brief. For the shape of moving sea, there was no battle. It ate whatever came its way, regardless of size, shape, or disposition. It absorbed microscopic plankton and giant squid with equal assurance. Had its surface been less fluid, it might have retained the circular scars left by the grappling suckers of the wildly threshing deep-water squid, or the jagged tooth marks of the anachronistic frill shark. But as it was, neither left any evidence of its absorption. When the lifting curtain of living slime swayed out of the mud and closed upon them, their fiercest death throes came to nothing. The horror did not know fear. There was nothing to be afraid of. It ate whatever moved or tried not to move. It had never encountered anything which could in turn eat it. If a squid sucker or a shark's tooth tore into the mass of its viscosity, the rent flowed in upon itself and immediately closed. If a segment was detached, it could be retrieved and absorbed back into the whole. The black mantle reigned supreme in its savage world of slime and silence. It groped greedily and endlessly through the mud, eating and never sleeping, never resting. If it lay still, it was only to trap food which might otherwise be lost. If it rushed with terrifying speed across the slimy bottom, it was never to escape an enemy, but always a flop, its hideous fluidity upon its soul an inevitable query, food. It had evolved out of the muck and slime of the primitive sea floor, and it was as alien to ordinary terrestrial life as the weird denizens of some wild planet in a distant galaxy. It was an anachronistic experiment of nature compared to which the saber-toothed tiger, the woolly mammoth, and even Tyrannosaurus, the slashing murderous king of the great earth reptiles, were as tame, weak entities. Had it not been for the vast volcanic upheaval on the bottom of the ocean basin, the black horror would have crept out its entire existence on the silent sea ooze without even manifesting its hideous powers to mankind. Fate in the form of a violent subterranean explosion covering huge areas of the ocean's floor hurled it out of its black slime world and sent it spinning toward the surface.
Mom?
Yes?
Can I let Lulu in? Because I want to try to get some training done with Lulu.
I suppose if you can get her in without letting the other dogs in.
Alright.
Ask Nova to help you.
And I'm gonna get the collar and leash ready
Okay.
so that she's not jumping around and distracting the other dogs.
Okay.
All right. Love you.
Love you too. All right. On that note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our first music break. On this break, we have Mr. Jeff Hilliard from the Los Angeles area with Finger Banger Day, Consensual Sex Van, Cock That Hills, as well as Multitude and Silicone Wave. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
What are we really doing? We can't live in a world that has this much hate. We have to get honest with ourselves. We have to take stock in what our part is in all of this madness. We have to let go, and we focus on giving love, setting that intention. And each and every single one of us gets up every day with the intention to give love. And we do it. We go out there and we give love every single day. Each one of us gets out there and makes love to our day, giving our day a multiple orgasm. The whole world will be orgasmic for the rest of eternity. Sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we should. There's no reason to try when the whole world is fucking insane. We open sex fan. You don't have to be alone. Come with me. Magic, healthy laughter, boundaries, space, ongoing mutual consent, passion, happily
with nothing to offer. No one will ever believe you. They see you for what you are. You're just a fraud, a shell of a person. And now the marvelous fear to penetrate the demons that have you. They enslave you to the depths of hate. I am unstoppable.
I got all the moves, got that molar too. You think it's wrong? I could've had too long. Fuck that. Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head, I'm never gonna cut it.
All these hookers sweet on me, but I'm chasing me, showing me that ass, and I banged up snatch. I do this shit for free. Go down your mama till 3. She's taking selfies with the mullet like it's history. How can I maneuver you with that pussy, dude? You sit like Buddha waiting on it to come to you. My lines are straight to the point. She shows me gratitude. So what's your latitude? Let's adjust your attitude. With a alligator, double dually Lamborghini, all up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini.
I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong? Back of the head too long. Fuck that.
With a alligator, double dually Lamborghini, all up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini.
Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head, I'm never gonna cut it.
Alligator, double dually Lamborghini, all up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini. You're like the butt of a butter knife cutting up panini. So climb back in your kangaroo pouch like a rolling genie. These moves are hot, these locks I got. This power cannot be disputed and it can't be bought. So you can find me in the studio with all these thoughts. You wanna fight my style, but you can't do what you're not, neighbor.
I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong? Back of the head too long. Fuck that. Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head, I'm never gonna cut it. Got that motherfucking baller. You wanna touch it?
Yeah. Next time you come around here with your bitch ass, just remember how my mullet makes your hoes pussy drip, drip, drip.
I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong? Back of the head too long. Fuck that. Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head, I'm never gonna cut it. I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong? Back of the head too long. Fuck that. Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head, I'm never gonna cut it. Never gonna cut it. Never gonna cut it.
Drip, drip,
Molar moves.
don't touch the molar, bitch.
Molar moves.
Drip, drip.
Molar moves. Never gonna cut it.
I just got a package, I can't wait to get home. I spent all day tracking the shipment on my phone, all that she was lacking. I ordered custom, I can't wait to get some. Take it to the bedroom, bitches always nagging. Now I got the air, I send the bitches packing, going my way. I have a new attraction, don't care what you say, it's better in every way. Now baby, it's time to play, we're gonna make us a tape and show everyone the way. Cause I'm going riding up the Silicon Valley. 'cause I'm calling my way, riding up Silicon Way. I see on the game with my new real dog, I'm gonna play. Just second way to Mount Silicon Lake. She is here to stay. She's my new real dog, and it's time to play. With my new real dog, I'm gonna play. She's my new real dog, and it's time to play.
The woman of my dreams. Voulez-vous coucher avec moi?
Fais-moi l'amour.
Je suis amoureux.
Je pense toujours à
Enchanté,
tu es charmant.
ma chérie. Mon
Tu es
futur
charmant.
nasty.
Tu
Is it touchy or nipple?
es charmant. Fais-moi l'amour. It's like living on a super yacht, making love to a robot. It's like owning a football team, but having sex with a robot. It's like winning an Oscar and Emmy and Grammy when you're fucking a robot. It's like saving a family with a newborn from a fire, but you're fucking a robot. I'm calling my way, riding up Silicon Way. I see on the game with my new real dog, I'm gonna play. Just second way to Mount Silicon Lake. She is here to stay. She's my new real dog, and it's time to play.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're doing story time with me, TessaTNT, and we're reading from Alfred Hitchcock's book, Monster Museum. And we're on the story of slime. Third hour, we're going to open up the lines for you to call in with your ghost stories. So I have a phone number and a link where you can come on camera if you want. If you don't, you can just, have an avatar or whatnot to be you while you speak through the StreamYard app. But yeah, I'd love to hear your stories. I'm going to finish or try to finish up on the latter part of my life ghost stories. I started from the beginning to, let's say about 20 some odd years ago. Yeah, that's what's coming up third hour. So, fate in the form of a violent subterranean explosion covering huge areas of the ocean's floor hurled it out of its black slime world and sent it spinning towards the surface. It had been an ordinary deepwater fish. It never would have survived the experience. The explosion itself, or the drastic lessening of water pressure as it shot toward the surface, would have destroyed it. But it was no ordinary fish. Its viscosity, or plasticity, or whatever it was that constituted its essential amoebic structure, permitted it to survive. It reached the surface slightly stunned and flopped on the surging waters with a great blob of black blubber. Immense waves stirred up the subterranean explosion, swept it swiftly toward the shore, and because it was somewhat stunned, it did not try to resist the roaring mountains of water. Let me just make sure my sound is going here. Aha! I knew I was missing one. Alright. It reached the surface slightly stunned and flopped on the surging waters like a blob. of black blubber. Immense waves, stirred up by the subterranean explosion, swept it swiftly toward the shore, and because it was somewhat stunned, it did not try to resist the roaring mountains of water. Along with scattered ash, pumice, and the puffed bodies of dead fish, the black horror was hurled toward a beach. The huge waves carried it more than a mile inland, far beyond the strip of sandy shore, and deposited it in the midst of a deep brackish swamp area. As luck would have it, the submarine explosion and subsequent tidal wave took place at night, and therefore the slime horror was not immediately subjected to a new and hateful experience, light. Although the midnight darkness of the storm-lashed swamp did not begin to compare with the Stygian blackness of the sea bottom, where even violet rays of the spectrum could not penetrate, the marsh darkness was nevertheless deep and intense. As the water of the great wave receded, loosing through the thorn jungle and back out to sea, the black horror clung to a mud bank surrounded by a rank growth of cattails. It was aware of the sudden startling change in its environment, and for some time it lay motionless, concentrating its attention on obscure internal readjustment, which the absence of crushing pressure and a surrounding cloak of frigid seawater demanded. Its adaptability was incredible and horrifying. It achieved in a few hours what an ordinary creature could have attained only through a process of gradual evolution. 3 hours after the titanic wave flopped it onto the mud bank, it had undergone swift organic changes which left it relatively at ease in its new environment. In fact, it felt lighter and more mobile than it ever had before in its sea basin existence. Sorry, I have a nose thing going on here. Not a picture. As it flung out fillers and attuned itself to the minutest vibrations and emanations of the swamp area, its pristine hunger drive reasserted itself with overwhelming urgency. In the tell which its sensory apparatus returned to the monstrous something which it served as brain. It excited it tremendously. It sensed at once that the swamp was filled with luscious tidbits of quivering food. More food, and food of a greater variety than it had ever encountered on the cold floor of the sea. Its savage, incessant hunger seemed unbearable. Its slimy mass was swept by a shuddering wave of anticipation. Sliding off the mud bank, it slithered over the cattails into an adjacent area consisting of black deep pools, interspersed with waterlogged tussocks. Weed stalks stuck out of the water, and the decaying trunks of fallen trees floated half-submerged in the larger pools. Ravenous with hunger, it sloshed into the bog area, flicking its fluid tentacles about. Within minutes, it had snatched up several fat frogs and a number of small fish. These, however, merely titillated its appetite. Its hunger turned into a kind of ecstasy, an ecstatic fury. It commenced a systematic hunt, plunging to the bottom of each pool and quickly but carefully exploring every inch of its oozy bottom. The first creature of any size which it encountered was a muskrat. An immense curtain of adhesive slime suddenly swept out of the darkness, closed upon it, and squeezed. Heartened and whetted by its find, the hood of horror rummaged the rank pools with renewed zeal. As surfaced, it carefully probed the tussocks of everything that might have escaped it in the water. Once it snatched up a small bird nesting in some swamp grass. Occasionally it slithered up the crisscross trunks of fallen trees, bearing them down with its unspeakably slimy bulk, and hung briefly suspended like a giant dripping curtain of black marsh mud. I'm not sure what this picture is, but it's kind of trippy. I have no idea what that picture is. Maybe it's the blob and like humans in it? I don't know. It was approached a somewhat less swampy and more deeply wooded area when it gradually became aware of a subtle change in its new environment. Paused, hesitating, and remained half in and out of a small pond near the edge of the nearest trees. although it had absorbed 25 or 30 pounds of food in the form of frogs, fish, water snakes, and muskrat, and a few smaller creatures. Its fierce hunger had not left it. Its monstrous appetite urged it on, and yet something held it anchored in the pond. What it sensed, but could not literally see, was the rising sun spreading a gray light over the swamp. The horror had never encountered an illumination except that generated by the grotesque phosphorescent appendages of the various deep-sea creatures and fishes. Natural light was totally unknown to it. As the dawn light strengthened, breaking through the scattering storm clouds, the black slime monster fresh from the inky floor of the sea sensed that something utterly unknown was flooding in upon it. Light was hateful to it. It cast out quick feelers, hoping to catch and crush the light, but the more frenzied its efforts became, the more intense became the abhorred aura surrounding it. At length, as the sun rose visibly above the trees, the horror, in baffled rage rather than in fear, grudgingly slid back into the pond and burrowed into the soft ooze of its bottom. There it remained while the sun shone and the small creatures of the swamp ventured forth in furtive errands. 15 miles away from Wharton Swamp in the small town of Clinton Center, Henry Hosing sleepily crawled out of the improvised alley shack, which had afforded him a degree of shelter. For the night that stumbled into the street, passing a hand across his rheumy eyes, he scratched the stubble on his cheek and blinked listlessly at the rising sun. He had not slept well. The storm of the night before had kept him awake. Besides, he had gone to bed hungry, and that never agreed with him. Glancing furtively along the street, he walked slouched forward, with his head bent down, and most of the time he kept his eyes on the walk or on the gutter in hopes of spotting a chance coin. Clinton Center had not been kind to him. The handouts were sparse, and only yesterday he had been warned out of town by one of the local policemen. Grumbling to himself, he reached the end of the street and started to cross. Suddenly, he stooped quickly and snatched up something from the edge of the pavement. It was a crumpled green bill, and as he frantically unfolded it, a look of stupefied rapture spread across his bristly face. $10! More money than he had possessed at any one time in months. Stowing it carefully in the one good pocket of his seedy gray jacket, he crossed the street with a swift stride. Instead of sweeping the sidewalks, his eyes now darted along the rows of stores and restaurants. He paused at one restaurant, hesitated, and finally went on until he found another less pretentious one a few blocks away. When he sat down, the counterman shook his head. "Get going, bud. No free coffee today." With a wide grin, the hobo produced his $10 bill and spread it on the counter. "That covers a good breakfast here, pardner." The counterman seemed irritated. Okay, what'll you have?" He eyed the bill suspiciously. Henry Hosing ordered orange juice, toast, ham and eggs, oatmeal, melon, and coffee. When it appeared, he ate every bit of it, ordered 3 additional cups of coffee, paid the check as if $2 breakfasts were customary with him, and then sauntered back to the street. Shortly after noon, after his $3 lunch, he saw the liquor store. For a few minutes, he stood across the street from it, fingering his $5 bill. Finally, he crossed with an abstracted smile, entered, and bought a quart of rye. He hesitated on the sidewalk, debating whether or not he should return to the little shack in the side alley. After a minute or two of indecision, he decided against it and stuck out instead for Wharton Swamp. The local police were far less likely to disturb him there, and since the skies were clearing and the weather mild, there was little immediate need of shelter. Angling off the highway, which skirted the swamp several miles from town, he crossed a marshy meadow, pushed through a fringe of brush, and sat down under a sweet gum tree, which bordered a deeply wooded area. By late afternoon, he had achieved a quite cheerful glow, and he had little inclination to return to Clinton Center. Rousing himself from reverie, he stumbled about, collecting enough wood for a small fire, and went back to his sylvan seat under the sweet gum. He slept briefly as dusk descended, but finally bestirred himself again to build a fire as deeper shadows fell over the swamp. Then he returned to his swiftly diminishing bottle. He was suspended in a warm net of inflamed fantasy when something abruptly broke the spell and brought him back to earth. The flickering flames of his fire had dwindled down until now only a dim, eerie glow illuminated the immediate area under the sweet gum. He saw nothing, and at the moment heard nothing, and yet he was filled with a sudden and profound sense of lurking menace. He stood up staggering, leaned back against the sweet gum, and peered fearfully into the shadows. In the deep darkness beyond the waning arc of firelight, he could distinguish nothing which had any discernible form or color. Then he detected the stench and shuddered. In spite of the reek of cheap whiskey which clung around him, the smell was overpowering. It was a fulsome fetidness, alien and utterly repellent. It was vaguely fish-like, but otherwise beyond any known comparison. As he stood trembling under the sweet gum, Henry Hosing thought of something dead which had lain for long ages at the bottom of the sea. Filled with mounting alarm, he looked around for some wood, which he might add to the dying fire. All he could find nearby, however, were a few twigs. He threw these on the flames, looked up briefly, and subsided. He listened and heard, or imagined he heard, an odd sort of slithering sound in the nearby bushes. It seemed to retreat slightly as the flame shot up. Genuine terror took possession of him. He knew that he was in no condition to flee, and now he came to the horrifying conclusion that whatever unspeakable menace waited in the surrounding darkness was temporarily held at bay only by the failing gleam of his little fire. Frantically, he looked around for more wood, but there was none. None, that is, within the faint glow of firelight, and he dared not venture beyond. He began to tremble uncontrollably. He tried to scream, but no sound came out of his tightened throat. The ghastly stench became stronger, and now he was sure that he could hear a strange, sliding, slithering sound in the black shadows beyond the remaining spark of firelight. Let me just check something here really quick. That's what's going on. Aha! He began to tremble uncontrollably. He tried to scream, but no sound came out of his tightened throat. The ghastly stench became stronger, and now he was sure that he could hear a strange slithering sound in the black shadows beyond the remaining spark of firelight. He stood frozen in absolute helpless panic as the tiny fire smoldered down into darkness. With the last instant, a charred bit of wood broke apart, sending up a few sparks, and in that flicker of final light, he glimpsed the horror. It had already glided out of the bushes, and now it rushed across the small clearing with a nightmare's speed. It was a final incarnation of all the fears, shuddering apprehensions, and bad dreams which Henry Hosing had ever known in his life. It was a fiend from the pit of hell come to claim him at last. A terrible ringing scream burst from his throat, but it was smothered before it was finished as the black shape of slime fastened upon him with irresistible force. "How's Gauss, old man, Gauss?" Got out of bed after 8 hours of fitful tossing and intermittent nightmares, and grouchily brewed coffee in the kitchen of his dilapidated farmhouse on the edge of Wharton's swamp. Half the night, it seemed, the stench of stale seawater had permeated the house. His interrupted sleep had been full of foreboding, full of shadow and evil portents. Muttering to himself, he finished breakfast, took a milk pail from the pantry, and started for the barn where he kept his single cow. As he approached the barn, the strange, offensive odor which had plagued him during the night assailed his nostrils anew. "Wharton's Swamp, that's what it is," he told himself, and he shook his fist at it. "Dang you, Wharton's Swamp!" When he entered the barn, the stench was stronger than ever. Scowling, he strode toward the rickety stall where he kept the cow, Sari. Then he stood still and stared. Sari was gone. The stall was empty. He re-entered the barnyard. "Sari!" he called. Rushing back into the barn, he inspected the stall. The rancid reek of the sea was strong here, and now he noticed a kind of shine on the floor. Bending closer, he saw that it was a slick coat of glistening slime, as if some unspeakable creature covered with ooze had crept in and out of the stall. This discovery, coupled with the weird disappearance of Sari, was too much for his jangled nerves. With a wild yell, he ran out of the barn and started for Clinton Center 2 miles away. His reception in the town enraged him. When he tried to tell people about the disappearance of his cow, Sari, about the reek of sea and ooze in his barn the night before, they laughed at him. The more impolite ones, that is. Most of the others patiently heard him out, and then winked and touched their heads, significantly, when he was out of sight. Bless your heart. Let me turn this music down just a smidge. That should be better. Alright. One man, the druggist, Jim Jellinson, seemed mildly interested. He said that as he was coming through his backyard from the garage late the previous evening, he had heard a fearful shriek somewhere in the distant darkness. It might, he averred, have come from the direction of Wharton's Swamp, but it had not been repeated, and eventually he had dismissed it from his mind. When Old Man Gauss started for home late in the afternoon, he was filled with sullen, resentful bitterness. They thought he was crazy, eh? Well, Sari was gone. They couldn't explain that away, could they? They explained the smell by saying it was dead fish cast up by the big wave, which had washed into the swamp during the storm. Well, maybe. And the slime on his barn floor, they said, was snails. Snails? As if any he'd ever seen could cause that much slime. As he was nearing home, he met Rupert Barnaby, his nearest neighbor. Rupert was carrying a rifle and was accompanied by Jib, his hound. Although there had been an element of bad blood between the two bachelor neighbors for some time, Old Man Gauss, much to Barnaby's surprise, nodded and stopped. "Evening, hunting neighbor." Barnaby nodded. "Thought Jib might start up a coon. Moon later, likely." "My cow's gone," Old Man Gauss said abruptly. "If you should see her," he paused, "but I don't think you will." Barnaby, bewildered, stared at him. "What you getting at?" Old Man Gauss repeated what he had been telling all day in the Clinton Center. He shook his head when he finished, adding, "I wouldn't go hunting in that swamp tonight for $10. For even $10,000. Rupert Barnaby threw back his head and laughed. He was a big man, muscular, resourceful, and level-headed, little given to even mild flights of the imagination. "Gauss," he laughed, "no use you giving me those spook stories. Your cow just got loose and wandered off. Why, I ain't even seen a bobcat in that swamp for over a year." Old Man Gauss set his lips in a grim line. "Maybe," he said as he turned away, "you'll see something worse than a wildcat in that swamp tonight." Shaking his head, Barnaby took after his impatient hound. Old Man Gauss was getting queer, all right. One of these days, he'd probably go off altogether and have to be locked up. Jib ran ahead, sniffing, darting from one ditch to another. As twilight closed in, Barnaby angled off the main road onto a twisting path which led into Wharton Swamp. He loved hunting. He would rather tramp through the brush than sit home in an easy chair. And even if an evening's foray turned up nothing, he didn't particularly mind. Actually, he made out quite well. At least half his meat supply consisted of the rabbits, raccoons, and occasionally deer, which he brought down in Wharton Swamp. I wonder what a raccoon tastes like. It's kind of an odd thing to eat. Their cute little hands. They're scary if they're coming after you. When the moon rose, he was deep in the swamp. Twice Jib started off after rabbits, but both times he returned quickly, looking somewhat sheepish. Something about his actions began to puzzle Barnaby. The dog seemed reluctant to move ahead. He hung directly in front of the hunter. Once Barnaby tripped over him and nearly fell headlong. The hunter paused finally, frowning, and looked ahead. The swamp appeared no different than usual. True, a rather offensive stench hung over it, but that was merely the result of the big waves which had splashed far inland during the recent storm. Probably an accumulation of seaweed and the decaying bodies of some dead fish lay rotting in the stagnant pools of the swamp. Barnaby spoke sharply to the dog. "What ails you, boy? Sit now. You trip me again, you'll get a boot." The dog started ahead some distance, but with an air of reluctance. He sniffed the clumps of marsh grass in a perfunctory manner and seemed to have lost interest in the hunt. Barnaby grew exasperated. Even when they discovered the fresh track of a raccoon in the soft mud near a little pool, Jib manifested only slight interest. He did run on ahead a little further, however, and Barnaby began to hope that, as they closed in, he would regain his customary enthusiasm. In this he was mistaken. As they approached a thickly wooded area, latticed with tree thorns and covered with a heavy growth of cattails, the dog suddenly crouched in the shadows and refused to budge. Barnaby was sure that the raccoon had taken refuge in the nearby thickets. The dog's unheard-of conduct infuriated him. After a number of sharp cuffs, Jib arose stiffly and moved ahead. The hair on his back bristled up like lion's mane. Swearing to himself, Barnaby pushed into the darkened thickets after him. It was quite black under the trees in spite of the moonlight, and he moved cautiously in order to avoid stepping into a pool. Suddenly, with a frantic yelp of horror, Jib literally darted between his legs and shot out of the thickets. He ran on, howling weirdly as he went. For the first time that evening, Barnaby experienced a thrill of fear. In all his previous experience, Jib had never turned tail. On one occasion, he had even plunged in after a sizable bear. Scowling into the deep darkness, Barnaby could see nothing. There were no baleful eyes glaring at him. As his own eyes tried to penetrate the surrounding blackness, he recalled Old Man Gow's warning with a bitter grimace. If the old fool happened to spot Jib streaking out of the swamp, Barnaby would never hear the end of it. The thought of this angered him. He pushed ahead now with a feeling of sullen rage for whatever had terrified the dog. A good rifle shot would solve the mystery. All at once he stopped and listened. From the darkness immediately ahead, he detected an odd sound, as if a large bulk were being dragged over the cattails. He hesitated, unable to see anything, stoutly resisting an idiotic impulse to flee. The black darkness and the slimy stench of stagnant pools here in the thickets seemed to be suffocating him. His heart began to pound as the slithering noise came closer. Every instinct told him to turn and run, but a kind of desperate stubbornness held him rooted to the spot. The sound grew louder, and suddenly he was positive that something deadly and formidable was rushing toward him through the thickets with accelerated speed. Throwing up his rifle, he pointed at the direction of the sound and fired. In the brief flash of the rifle, he saw something black and enormous and glistening, like the great flapping hood, break through the final thicket. It seemed to be rolling toward him. It was moving with nightmare swiftness. He wanted to scream and run, but even as the horror rushed forward, he understood that flight at this point would be futile. Even though the blood seemed to have congealed in his veins, he held the rifle pointed up and kept on firing. The shots had no more visible effect than so many pebbles launched from a slingshot. At the last instant, his nerve broke and he tried to escape, but the monstrous hood lunged upon him, flapped over him, and squeezed, and his attempt at a scream turned into a gurgle in his throat. Old Man Gow's got up early, after another uneasy night, and walked out to inspect the barnyard area. Nothing further seemed amiss, but there was still no sign of Sari. and that detestable odor arose from the direction of Wharton Swamp when the wind was right. After breakfast, Gauss set out for Rupert Barnaby's place, a mile or so distant along the road. He wasn't sure himself what he expected to find. When he reached Barnaby's small but neat frame house, all was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, Barnaby was up and about soon after sunrise. On a sudden impulse, Gauss walked up the path and rapped on the front door. He waited, and there was no reply. He knocked again, and after another pause, stepped off the porch. Jib, Barnaby's hound, slunk around the side of the house. Ordinarily, he would bound about and bark, but today he stood motionless, or nearly so. He was trembling, and stared at Gauss. The dog had a cowed, frightened, guilty air which was entirely alien to him. "Where's Rupp?" Gauss called to him. "Go get Rupp." Instead of starting off, the dog threw back his head and emitted an eerie, long-drawn howl. Gauss shivered with a backward glance at the silent house and started off down the road. Now, maybe they'd listen to him, he thought grimly. The day before, they had laughed about the disappearance of Sari. Maybe they wouldn't laugh so easily when he told them that Rupert Barnaby had gone into Wharton Swamp with his dog, and that the dog had come back alone. When Police Chief Miles Underbeck saw Old Man Gauss come into headquarters in Clinton Center, he sat back and sighed heavily. He was busy this morning, and undoubtedly Old Man Gauss was coming to inquire about the infernal cow of his that had wandered off. The old eccentric had a new and startling report, however. He claimed that Rupert Barnaby was missing. He'd gone into the swamp the night before, Gauss insisted, and had not returned. When Chief Underbeck questioned him closely, Gauss admitted that he wasn't positive Barnaby hadn't returned. It was barely possible that he had returned home very early in the morning and then left again before Gauss arrived. But Gauss fixed his flashing eyes on the chief and shook his head. "He never came out, I tell ye. The dog of his knows. Howled he did, like a dog howls for the dead. Whatever come took Sari, got Barnaby in the swamp last night." Chief Underbeck was not an excitable man. Gauss's burst of melodrama irritated him and left him unimpressed. Somewhat gruffly, he promised to look into the matter of Barnaby, but not turned up by evening. Barnaby, he pointed out, he swamp better than anyone else in the county, and he was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. Probably, the chief suggested, he had sent the dog home and gone elsewhere after finishing hunt the evening before. Chances were he'd be back by supper time. Old Man Gauss shook his head with a kind of fatalistic skepticism. Vouching that events would soon prove his fears well-founded, he shambled grouchily out of the station. The day passed, and there was no sign of Rupert Barnaby. At 6 o'clock, Old Man Gauss grimly marched into the Crown, Clinton Center's second-rate hotel, and registered for a room. At 7 o'clock, Chief Underbeck dispatched the call car to Barnaby's place. He waited impatiently for its return, drumming on the desk, disinterestedly shuffling through a sheaf of reports which had accumulated during the day. The prowl car returned shortly after 8. Sergeant Grimes made his report. "Nobody there, sir. Place locked up tight. Searched the grounds. All we saw was Barnaby's dog. Alvin ran off as if the devil were on his tail." Chief Underbeck was troubled. If Barnaby was missing, a search should be started, but it was already getting dark, and portions of Wharton Swamp were very nearly impassable, even during the day. Besides, there was no proof that Barnaby had not gone off for a visit, perhaps to nearby Stantonville, for instance, to call on a crony and stay overnight. By 9 o'clock, he had decided to postpone any action till morning. A search now would probably be futile in any case. The swamp offered too many obstacles. If Barnaby had not turned up by morning, and there was no report that he had been seen elsewhere, a systematic search of the marsh could begin. Not long after he had arrived at his decision, and as he was somewhat wearily preparing to leave headquarters to go home, a new and genuinely alarming interruption took place. Shortly before 9:30, a car braked to a sudden stop outside headquarters. An elderly man hurried in, supported by an arm, a sobbing, hysterically young girl. Her skirt and stockings were torn, and there were a number of scratches on her face. After assisting her to a chair, the man turned to Chief Underbeck and the other officers who gathered round. Picked her up on the highway out near Wharton Swamp, screamed at the top of her lungs. He wiped his forehead. She ran right in front of my car, missed her by a miracle. She was so crazy with fear I couldn't make sense out of what she said. Seems like something grabbed her boyfriend in the bushes out there. Anyway, I got her in the car without much trouble, and I guess I broke the speed law getting here. Chief Underbeck surveyed the man keenly. He was obviously shaken himself, and since he did not appear to be concealing anything, the chief turned to the girl. He spoke soothingly, doing his best to reassure her, and at length he composed herself sufficiently to tell her story. Her name was Dolores Rell, and she lived in a nearby Stantonville. Earlier in the evening, she had gone riding with her fiancé, Jason Buckmeist of Clinton Center. As Jason was driving along the highway adjacent to Wharton Swamp, she had remarked that the early evening moonlight was very romantic over the marsh. Jason had stopped the car, and after they had surveyed the scene for some minutes, he suggested that since the evening was warm, a brief stroll in the moonlight might be fun. Dolores had been reluctant to leave the car, but at length had been persuaded to take a short walk along the edge of the marsh, where the terrain was relatively firm. As the couple were walking along under the trees, perhaps 20 yards or so from the car, Dolores became aware of an unpleasant odor and wanted to turn back. Jason, however, told her she only imagined it and insisted on going further. As the trees drew closer together, they walked Indian file, Jason taking the lead. Suddenly, she said, they heard something swishing through the brush toward them. Jason told her not to be frightened, that it was probably someone's cow. As it came closer, however, it seemed to be moving with incredible speed, and it didn't seem to be making any kind of noise I would make. At the last second, Jason whirled with a cry of fear and told her to run. Before she could move, she saw a monstrous something rushing under the trees in the dim moonlight. For an instant, she stood rooted with horror. Then she turned and ran. She thought she heard Jason running behind her. She couldn't be sure, but immediately after, she heard him scream. In spite of her terror, she turned and looked behind her. At this point in her story, she became hysterical again, and several minutes passed before she could go on. She could not describe exactly what she had seen as she looked over her shoulder. The thing which she had glimpsed rushing under the trees had caught up with Jason. It almost completely covered him. All she could see of him was his agonized face and part of one arm, low near the ground, as if the thing were squatting astride him. She could not say what it was. It was black, formless, bestial, and yet not bestial. It was the dark, gliding kind of indescribable horror which she had shuddered at when she was a little girl alone in the nursery at night. She shuddered now and covered her eyes as she tried to picture what she had seen. Oh God, the darkness came alive! The darkness came alive! Somehow she went on presently. She had stumbled through the trees into the road. She was so terrified she hardly noticed the approaching car. There could be no doubt that Dolores Rell was in the grip of genuine terror. Chief Underbeck acted with alacrity after the white-faced girl had been driven to a nearby hospital for treatment of her scratches and the administration of the sedative. Underbeck rounded up all available men on the force, equipped them with shotguns, rifles, and flashlights, hurried them into 4 prowl cars, and started off for Wharton Swamp. Jason Buckmeist's car was found where he had parked it. It had not been disturbed. A search of the nearby swamp area, conducted in the glare of flashlights, proved this. Whatever had Buckmeist apparently carried him off into the farthest recesses of the sprawling swamp. After 2 futile hours of brush breaking and marsh sloshing, Chief Underbeck wearily rounded up his men and called off the hunt until morning. As the first faint streaks of dawn appeared in the sky over Wharton Swamp, the search began again. Reinforcements, including civilian volunteers from Clinton Center, had arrived, and a systematic combing of the entire swamp commenced. By noon, the search had proved fruitless, or nearly so. One of the searchers brought in a battered hat and a rye whiskey bottle, which he had discovered on the edge of the marsh under a sweet gum tree. The shapeless felt hat was old and worn, but it was dry. It had therefore apparently been discarded in the swamp since the storm a few days ago. The whiskey bottle looked new. In fact, a few drops of rye remained in it. The searcher reported that the remains of a small campfire were also found under the sweet gum. In the hope that this evidence might have some bearing on the disappearance of Jason Buckmice, Chief Underbeck ordered a canvass of every liquor store in Clinton Center in an attempt to learn the names of everyone who had recently purchased a bottle of the particular brand of rye found under the tree. The search went on, and mid-afternoon brought another, more ominous discovery. A diligent searcher investigating a trampled area and a large growth of cattails picked a rifle out of the mud. After the slime and dirt had been wiped away, two of the searchers vouched that it belonged to Rupert Barnaby. One of them had hunted with him and remembered a bit of scroll work on the rifle stock. While Chief Underbeck was weighing this unpalatable bit of evidence, a report of the liquor store canvass in Clinton Center arrived. Every recent purchaser of a quart bottle of particular brand in question had been investigated. Only one could not be located, a tramp who had hung around the town for several days and had been ordered out. Excuse me. By evening, most of the exhausted searching party were convinced that the tramp, probably in a state of homicidal viciousness, brought on by drink, had murdered both Rupert Barnaby and Jason and secreted their bodies in one of the deep pools of the swamp. The chances were the murderer was sleeping off the effects of drink somewhere in the tangled thickets of the marsh. Most of the searchers regarded Dolores Rell's melodramatic story with a great deal of skepticism. In the dim moonlight, they pointed out a frenzied, wild-eyed tramp bent on imminent murder. It very well have resembled some kind of monster, and the girl's hysteria had probably magnified what she had seen. As night closed over the dismal morass, Chief Underbeck reluctantly suspended the hunt. In view of the fact that the murderer probably still lurked in the woods, however, he decided to establish a system of night-long patrols along the highway which paralleled the swamp. If the quarry lay hidden in the treacherous tangle of trees and brush, he would not be able to escape onto the highway without running into one of the patrols. The only other means of egress from the swamp lay miles across the mire, where the open sea washed against the reedy beach, and it was quite unlikely that the fugitive would even attempt escape in that direction. The patrols were established in 3-hour shifts, 2 men to a patrol, both heavily armed and both equipped with powerful searchlights. They were ordered to investigate every round or movement which they detected in the brush, boarded the highway. After a single command to halt, they were to shoot to kill. Any curious motorists who stopped to inquire about the hunt were to be swiftly waved on their way, after being warned not to give rise to anyone and to report all hitchhikers. Fred Storr and Luke Knudsen, on the midnight to 3 o'clock patrol, passed an uneventful 2 hours on their particular stretch of the highway. Matson finally sat down on a fallen tree stump a few yards from the edge of the road. "Legs given out," he commented wryly, resting his rifle on the stump. "Might as well sit a few minutes." Fred Storr lingered nearby. "Guess so, Luke. Don't look like..." Suddenly he scrolled into the black fringes of the swamp. "You hear something, Luke?" Luke listened, twisting around on the stump. "Well, maybe," he said finally. "Kind of a little scratchy sound like." He got up, retrieving his rifle. "Let's take a look," Fred suggested in a low voice. He stepped over the stump and Luke followed him toward the tangle of brush which marked the border of the swamp jungle. Several yards further along, they stopped again. The sound became more audible, It was a kind of slithering, scraping sound, such as might be produced by a heavy body dragging itself over uneven ground. Sounds like a snake, Luke ventured. A damn big snake. We'll get a little closer, Fred whispered. You be ready with that gun when I switch on my light. He moved ahead a few more yards, then a powerful yellow ray stabbed into the thickets ahead as Fred switched on his flashlight. The ray searched the darkness, probing in one direction and then another. Luke lowered his rifle a little, frowning. Don't see a thing, he said. Nothing but a big pool of black scum up ahead there. Before Fred had time to reply, the pool of black scum reared up into horrible life. In one hideous second, it hunched itself into an unspeakable glistening hood and rolled forward with fearful speed. Luke Matson screamed and fired simultaneously as the monstrous scarf of slime shot forward. A moment later, it swayed above him. He fired again and the thing fell upon him. In avoiding the initial rush of the horror, Fred Storr lost his footing. He fell headlong and turned just in time to witness a sight which slowed the blood in his veins. The monster had pounced upon Luke Matson. Now, as Fred watched, literally paralyzed with horror, it spread itself over and around the form of Luke until he was completely enveloped. The faint writhing of his limbs could still be seen. Then the thing squeezed, swelling into a hood and flattening itself again. And the writhing ceased. As soon as the thing lifted and swung forward in his direction, Fred Storr, goaded by frantic fear, overcame the paralysis of horror which had frozen him. Grabbing the rifle which had fallen beside him, he aimed it at the shape of living slime and started firing. Pure terror possessed him as he saw that the shots were having no effect. The thing lunged toward him, to all visible appearances entirely oblivious to the rifle slugs tearing into its loathsome viscid mass. Acting out of some instinct which he himself could not have named, Fred Storr dropped the rifle and seized his flashlight, playing its powerful beam directly upon the onrushing horror. The thing stopped scant feet away and appeared to hesitate. It slid quickly aside at an angle, but he followed it immediately with a cone of light. It backed up finally and flattened out, as if trying by that means to avoid the light. But he trained the beam on it steadily, sensing with every primitive fiber which he possessed that the yellow shaft of light was the one thing which held off hideous death. Now there were shots in the nearby darkness, and other lights began stabbing the shadows. Members of the adjacent patrols, alarmed by the sound of rifle fire, had come running to investigate. Suddenly, the nameless horror squirmed quickly out of the flashlight's beam and rushed away in the darkness. In the leaden light of early dawn, Chief Underbeck climbed into a police car waiting on the highway near Wharton Swamp and headed back to Clinton Center. He had made a decision, and he was grimly determined to act on it at once. When he reached headquarters, he made 2 telephone calls in quick succession, one to the governor of the state and the other to the commander of the nearby Camp Evans military reservation. Well, guys, we gotta leave it there, because we do have to go to our second music break. On this break, we have, once again, Mr. Jeff Hilliard from Los Angeles, California, with his song Abandoned. And then we also have our girl, Miss Mia Savage, from the Phoenix, Arizona area, with her band, Antidote for Savages, which she does all the music, lyrics, every instrument by herself. It's kind of like a little tiny Trent Reznor. But she's going to be singing Lemurian Crypto, Your Skeleton, and The Bottom Line. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
Left here alone, just a shadow of my erection on the wall. Why won't you answer my calls? I gave you my all with the love we made together.
You found it in your bed. I am.
I just don't know what went wrong.
Something's stuck in my throat.
I rolled the dice, 'cause I thought I saw forever in your eyes. Was all that passion a lie? Just another fool you seduced and left behind. Heartless and cruel, you probably do this all the time, baby. I ain't no puppet dog.
No record, no books, no job, no savings or money. Just a choice right now between fear and love. Right now, between fear and love.
Thanks, Truzado. Welcome back. Thank you guys so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Got a little hiccup there. I was muted over on the sound platform, the Banana Voice Meter Banana, which I actually love because it really helps with background noise, like when the dogs are going off or people are being loud in the next room, you can't hear it. But anyways, we've been doing a Halloween special this weekend for eTalk Radio, and yeah, it's been a blast. Really love sharing ghost stories with you and monster stories. It's been quite intriguing. We did have a not so nice person join us last night, which caused me to like take everyone off the screen. I did not hang up on them. I just took them off the screen during break because you can hear them talking during break if I don't do that, or I could just mute them. But yeah, everybody just ended up leaving. But yeah, one guy was particularly rude, which had me going for the evening. But hey, we're back. So last night, if you listened to my ghost stories during the third hour, you heard about me meeting the devil in my mom's old room at my grandma's house and seeing little goblin duties there in the chicken yard, as well as some other stories. Well, going back on that story, come to find out because after my mom had passed, she was killed by a drunk driver, my 3 older siblings and me and my little brother went separate directions, and sometimes we'd get together. And one of these times we got together, we're telling ghost stories and stuff that we had all experienced throughout our lives. And I told that story, and my dad turned white as a sheet. And I was like, "What, Dad? What's up?" And he said, "Your mom told me the exact same story, but instead of the man, aka the devil, being in the doorway, he actually came into the room and was right next to her bed, and they actually had a lengthy conversation. Who knows what they talked about? Only my mom and he knows. But yeah, that went to the grave with her. So that was pretty interesting that she had had the same experience as I, but luckily my dad had taught me to say, due to my nightmares and stuff that I'd have, and it was hard for me to get back to sleep, say God stands before me, Satan fall behind. So I used that line, and that helped me to immediately be knocked out and not have to converse with this feller. Well, my mom, on the other hand, had a long, lengthy conversation. I think that was part of her curse, if you will. And there was another thing that I was going to go back to, but I'm trying to remember what it was. Anywho's. So, moving right along. So, when I was in the military, I became part of the Broken Platoon, which was called MRP, Marine Rehabilitation Platoon, for Broken Marines. And it was during Hurricane Bonnie. And so we're all stuck in our squad bay and trying to find ways to pass the time. Well, there's a female broken platoon, and then there's a male broken platoon. One fellow that was a part of that platoon, his name was, I believe, Corporal Black. Could have been PFC Black, but he had passed due to some military training. He laid down on the road, in the prone position, looking out for the bad guys, and actually got ran over by a tank and passed. But this particular fellow had a Ouija board. And I don't know if you guys have ever used a Ouija board. I don't suggest you do. I did end up using it this night. So the girls broke out the Ouija board, and I'm intrigued because I was raised from a certain point as LDS, baptized and everything, and taught that, you couldn't use Ouija boards, and you should also not do D&D. You should not do Dungeons and Dragons, which I don't understand. Like, I played it and really, had no ill effects on me. But I'm sitting there watching the girls do it, and they're like, "Hey, you want to try?" And I was like, "I'll watch a little longer and then I'll try." And so then I got on there and asked, "Hey, can I talk to my mom?" And it said no. And I was like, "Well, F you then. I'm going to go take a shower." So I went and took a shower and then came back out. And when I came back out, The Ouija board was on my rack. Rack is another term for bed. Nobody was there. It's just sitting there. So I put my shower goods away and go over and start to use it. Well, I didn't know the rules of the Ouija board. I didn't know you're not supposed to do it by yourself. So I get on there and I was like, can I talk to my mom? And all of a sudden this thing just starts going off. Like, ching, 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 like everywhere. And the more it goes, like the faster it goes. Tell Gary, Kathy, Greg, John, tell your dad. I'm okay. Everything's okay. So many things we had talked about, is she happy? Yes, she's happy. She can go anywhere she wants, anytime she wants, etc., etc. It was a really good conversation, I thought. Come to find out later on, the girls were trying to get my attention and calling my name and like even shaking me, trying to get me aware of their presence or off the board or whatnot. And I didn't hear or feel them. I was just so like into this board and so like tunnel vision. Excitedly, I called my dad the next day and told him, guess what, Dad? I talked to Mom on the Ouija board, and he was a little less than enthusiastic. My dad was a Jack Mormon, but he still believed that the Ouija board was bad. And he said, Sissy, he used to call me Sissy, that could be another spirit, just trying to tell you things just to get closer to you. So I recommend you don't do it again. So I never did. That was my one and only time on the Ouija board. No real ill effects except for shortly after that, I had my very first sleep paralysis. So after this, I was feeling incredibly tired for several days. And except for today, like, I love taking naps. But in my earlier days, like, no time for naps. Like, I don't want to miss anything and, got to grab the world by the balls. But I was so tired and waiting for to get into the head, which is the bathroom. But it was full, so I decided to lay down on this rack right outside the head and wait for girls to file out so I could get in there. And I fell asleep, and all of a sudden, I hear one of my sergeants say, all right, everybody line up for chow. And I open my eyes, and I can see, like, the girls running out of the bathroom and other directions, but I can't move. I'm frozen, like a form of sleep paralysis, the one and only time I ever had sleep paralysis. And I tried with all my might to get up. I'm trying to move my arms, trying to move my legs. I just can't do it. I tried so hard that for a week after that, like, I finally broke free. For a week after that, like, my whole body, or all my muscles that I had been tensing up, trying to get free from this, hurt so bad for the next week because I was straining so hard. Fast forward to current life. So I told the story about the ghost cat in my matchstick house in Mancos. Matchstick house came from Mesa Verde. Mesa Verde is where my mom went into a kiva and saw, I want to say, some witch doctors or medicine men, or I don't know what you would call them. But they were from the Aztec tribe. She went down in this kiva, and there was 3 of them next to this podium, like they were looking at this podium and reading off something, and they all look up at her, and she could tell that they were angry that she had seen them and interrupted whatever they were doing, even though they're in the spiritual realm. But ever since that point, they were from Arkansas. They actually went to Colorado, which is where I'm at. Mesa Verde is like 40 miles away from me. But she felt like every car on the road was after her, and she's like white knuckle driving and praying that no cars hit her. She just wanted to make it home to us. And on her way home, she actually wrote my grandpa and told him about what she had experienced and asked him, could he please help her to plan her funeral? And the only reason I know about that is because when she got home, she got us all in the car. Her and my grandpa got into quite the argument. And she's like, Pa, like, I'm not making this up. Like, I really need your help on this. Like, this is really going to happen. I wouldn't make something like this up. And he finally relented and decided he would help her, all the way down to what clothes she was going to wear for her funeral. And he ended up bestowing upon us 10 acres each, which, after he had passed, and then my grandma got really sick, some of the family members there took over, and we didn't get our 10 acres each. But yeah, she knew she was going to die. She planned her own funeral. Pretty freaky. Fast forward past Mancos and everything, I moved from Cortez to Mancos, then from Mancos to Durango, Colorado, in this little community called Twin Lakes, in a little A-frame house. And it was pretty cute and unique, and I did a lot of, landscaping and gardening out there. I even bought some, beef eater tomatoes and planted those, and they came out as cherry tomatoes. I don't know if it's because of elevation that they grew smaller, but I still, ate them. I didn't really have any experiences right away. I always had this weird feeling that there's something there, not quite sure what it was. My little daughter, not Nova, but Kinsey, started to act a bit peculiar. And so, she's about a year and a half, 2 years old. And she would insist on not having any lights in her room. And she would insist on having her door closed. And this was pretty strange to us. And we talked to her about it. And she's like, well, I have to, because Mommy E needs Baby E to sleep. And if the lights are on or the door is open, Baby E can't sleep and Mommy E gets mad. We're like, okay, Mommy E, Baby E, why do you call them that? And she said, because, Mommy, that's the sound they make. Well, that's creepy enough. And so, we'd ask her more questions about it. So, like, what happened to Mommy E and Baby E? And she said, Baby E fell out of a tree and died. So Mommy E died to be with her. Well, what's Mommy E look like? Well, Mommy E looks like she's been in the bathtub too long. So, like, her hands and stuff were, like, really, really wrinkly. And she had blonde hair. Really strange things started to happen after that. Vern, before we even moved there, before Kinsey and I had met Vern, would have these strange dreams, like where his family's being lifted up against the walls of the A-frame, and these spirits are like flying around and through them and stuff. And so, he woke up and he's got his samurai sword, and he's like, trying to kill the spirits with a samurai sword. But yeah, he woke up naked in his bed, holding a samurai sword, like, what the hell? Well, after, Kinsey told us about this Mommy E, Baby E thing, one night we're laying there and we're talking and whatever, and all of a sudden we hear the doorknob turning. Then all of a sudden it turns and opens and releases. So I jump out of bed and run out. Kinsey's not there, run everywhere. At this point, we moved her from the Mommy E, Baby E room downstairs. The funny thing is, instead of having a couch, we actually had like a cushion porch on chains in the front room there, and we had her little baby bed and stuff, and she was down there asleep. It was not her that turned the doorknob. So that was freaky enough. There's no way she could have ran down the stairs and gotten in her bed in the time that I jumped out of the bed and ran to talk to her and be like, hey, you need to be in bed. She was already in bed and asleep. And shortly after that, I guess I had a dream. I don't remember. All I know is what my husband told me, and he wasn't quite my husband at that point, but he said that I sat up in bed and I repeatedly said, no, 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 and got up and ran towards the window. Well, this is on the second floor. Like, I was running towards the window full speed. Luckily, he caught me because I would have gone out not only is it 2 stories up, but then there's also a drop off that goes down about 10 to 15 feet further. So I would have definitely passed had I made it out the window. It would have been a terrible death. Otherwise, that was about it. That house got foreclosed on. And I ended up finding this house that we're in currently in the paper. And as soon as we pulled up, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is our home. Like, I just knew it was my home. I just love the property. All the really big blue spruces. You could tell that this property has been here for a while. The trees have been here for a while. And the blue spruces actually, kind of do the line of the property. And it was just like, even though it's a trailer house, it's a double wide on a foundation with a garage area built on it. But I just loved it so much. We had some paranormal activity happening here, and one of my first occurrences with the spirit here was everybody was gone, and I was getting ready for work at this time. I was bartending at the Sky Lodge and Casino here in Ignacio. And I was getting ready for work, and as I was leaving, my window to my bedroom is right next to the front gate, and as I'm opening the gate to leave, I hear a man coughing, and it scared the crap out of me because, like I said, I'm the only one here. And so I was like, thank God, I'm leaving at this point, because there's no way, if I was going back in, that I would stay. I would not be going back in. Thank God I'm going to work. So I told my husband about that, and the name came to me, John. And I had a nice neighbor. She now lives up the road, and sometimes I give her rides to the store or whatnot. But she's about the nice old man that used to live here, and he had died here from emphysema, and his name was John. Well, that's incredible. I picked up on that name, and I'd always refer to him as that name. Other things that would happen here. We'd have the hall light on for the kids because, they were scared to go to bed at night, and the night lights just weren't enough. And with the lights on in the hallway, you could see a shadow, and not just a shadow, but super tall to the point where at the top crack of the door, you could see the shadow just walking back and forth, which it's only 2 feet of hallway space, but just pacing back and forth in front of the door. John is a nice spirit. He's never caused any harm. My littles have even seen them. Floyd and Lily were like, hey, Mom, we saw this old man last night messing with the thermostat. He was sitting there messing with it, trying to fix it. We quit using our natural gas heating some years ago because we had a duct issue. Vern left the bath water on, and the heating duct collapsed. And so, not only were we getting hot air, but there was also cold air getting in right in this room. And so we quit using that and started using the wood stove. But yeah, that's generally all that it was. He'd just be here trying to fix things or be seen, walking around or whatnot. The freaky thing is doppelgangers. So I have my very own doppelganger, and she showed up many years ago. So I'm thinking my daughter Nova was about 8 or 9 years old. So this would be 10 years ago is when my doppelganger first started showing itself. And at first they saw her in the kitchen doing dishes. One time, we've had several different roommates. Not ever going to do that again. Knock on wood. Not going to do it. So I'm in here playing Texas Hold'em with my roommates, and I'm wearing shorts and I think my Leonard Skinner t-shirt. And all of a sudden, Nova comes running in. He's like, Mom, why'd you do that? Why'd you push me down and then lock the door? And I'm like, I didn't. why would I do that? And she's like, and why did you change your clothes? And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, you took me out to the tree fort. So the tree fort is what we refer to as, in the backyard here, we have a bunch of blue spruces, and it's got a cavernous area in the middle of it. And right now we have some tables and chairs and stuff out there, and it's a nice hangout spot. Like, I actually put up some pine cone lights and stuff. It's pretty sweet. During the summer, it's like the coolest spot to hang out as far as temperature and just being beautiful. But she said I took her out there and then pushed her down and laughed and ran into the house, closed the door, and locked the door behind me, and just sat there and laughed at her. And said she tried the front door. That didn't work, which is weird because we were right by the front door, but we didn't hear it. I don't know if it was that entity, like, keeping us from hearing it. But she finally got through the back door, and that's when she came in and yelled at me and asked me why I'd done that, which I never did. And then, as they got older, we would go and do karaoke. And Kinsey was old enough to be watching her little sister Nova. So we'd be like, all right, we're just going to go down the road for a few hours and do karaoke with Crazy Charlie. And, you guys be good. Don't burn down the house, yada, yada. This one night, they call us in a panic. And this is not the first time they saw this girl, but there was repeated times that they saw this little girl with blonde hair wearing a white dress, just like my doppelganger wearing a white dress. And this little girl, they said, was running around in circles in the backyard, screaming like high-pitched, like blood-curdling screams. And they're just standing there at the back door watching her. And there's no longer a back door now. Now we have windows. We took out the back door and put windows in. But this door was so jacked up that you'd close it. There was no handle on it. Like, it had a lock at the top of it. So the kids are watching this thing, like, running around, and then it starts running towards them. So, they got a chair by the back door, and, they make sure that the lock is pulled. And this girl is, like, going like this through the hole where the handle used to be, like, trying to open it and trying to get in. And they're calling us, like, screaming their little heads off. Luckily, it's only, like, 3 minutes away that we were. So we came back, and, of course, there's nothing. Later on, did I mention that my doppelganger was doing the dishes? Like, I wish she'd come back and do that, because I could really use help with that. But she's also been seen, like, by my littles. So Kinsey and Nova are the older two, and then Floyd and Lily. So Kinsey's 23. She's going to be 24 in November. Nova's 19. Then Floyd and Lily. Lily's 8. Floyd's 11. So I'm coming down the stairs, doing some gardening. I went into the house to grab some water or something. Coming down the stairs, and just the look on Floyd and Lily's face, like, their jaws dropped, their eyes are wide. They're like, Mom, there's a little blonde-haired girl in a white dress following you down the stairs. And I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't see anything. My old dog, Gilly, she lived to be about 21 years old. She was a boxer Akita Pit, loyal to the core. She just didn't want to leave us, so she lived forever. I still see her sometimes. I don't see her beautiful face, but I see her, like, going around corners, so I see the back end of her. But she had been attacked a couple times by whatever was here. And I think this thing got infuriated that she could see it. And this one time, it's while we had actually taken our nephew Joe in, and Nova and Joe are hanging out, and all of a sudden they hear this noise coming from the bathroom. And they walk in there and check it out, and they see that Gilly is in the toilet, like, Her front legs and her head is in the toilet. Like something is trying to drown this dog. And both of them, I think they were like 13 years old. They're only a month apart. These two, they're so close. But they're both trying to pull her out, and they can't get her out. Like they're trying with all their might to pull her out, and it's just not working because something is like shoving her in the toilet. And finally, whatever it was released, and they all went flying back, Gilly and all. And that was pretty freaky. She had been attacked a couple times. One time in our hallway next to the bathroom, I had a little shelf area that I put the towels and other things on. And it's right next to the bathroom, and something had shoved her under that lower shelf. One time, and this is unfreaking believable, Joe and Nova saw Gilly. She was lifted up to the freaking ceiling and then dropped. The things this poor dog went through. So, like I'm saying, John's a good spirit, but there's something else here. And, you know, we figure it's because we're spiritually awakened, like we're able to see and hear things. And it's kind of like a beacon to things, and it kind of calls things in because these spirits need help, whether to have their story discovered or to get to the other side or whatever it may be. So we had several different neighbors here next door. And as one of the neighbors was about to move out, they had like a going away party. So they had a barbecue and all this stuff, and we're all sitting around talking, and we started talking about paranormal things. Like, have you guys ever had any paranormal experiences? And, you know, we shared our stories with them. And they said they had heard sounds and stuff. They really never saw anything. But they said, well, haven't you been to the museum? I was like, well, I've been near it, like walked by it, and used to work next door to it. Always wanted to go, but every time I do try to go, they're closed, whether it's like off season or, you know, weird hours. Well, come to find out, this property is actually a battleground between the Native Americans and the French and the Spanish and whatever else. It makes a lot of sense. Like I was saying, we've had different roommates. One of the roommates being our friend and brother, Mr. Brian Zahn. And one of the first things he told me was what he saw follow me home one night. So, like I said, I've dealt with the paranormal all my life. Kind of stayed in the paranormal closet forever until 2012. Well, when 2012 came along, a friend of my eldest daughter's, Kinsey, her friend Dylan Redwine, went missing one Thanksgiving break. So they had lived here before, and she knew him through school and the after-school program at the Pine Valley Church. His mom and dad got divorced, so he moved with his mom to Colorado Springs. Well, he was court-ordered. He did not want to, but court-ordered to come back and spend Thanksgiving break with his dad. Didn't want to do it, had issues. I don't think he was even here for a full day before his dad took his life. Well, he went missing, and that's when I met Kat, who was my mentor. And that's when we started our own paranormal group called Four Corners Paranormal Investigations. And so we'd go up and investigate. And one time we went up to investigate. First, we parked down the road, and heard the craziest noises coming from the field behind us. We're just like, you know, about a block up from where his life was taken. And then later on, we decided, okay, we're going to get out, and we walked down there and got to the house, and Cat and Glow go across the cattle guard. So there's like the driveway, but at the beginning of this driveway is a cattle guard. So Kat and Glow like run over there and they're like, hurry, we only have so much time. Well, me and Kat's daughter Sadie are standing there and we're just shaking our heads. No, we're not going over there. There's somebody in this house. They're like, no, nobody's here. Mark's gone. He's on the road. He's trucking. Nobody's here. Well, what we saw that they didn't see, which amazes me, was this greenish blue light coming from the windows, kind of like the light you see when somebody's watching TV, and this dog thing on its hind legs running at a very quick rate of speed back and forth in front of the windows. We didn't want to cross this cattle guard. We didn't want to get any closer to whatever the hell this was. What it reminded me of was Anubis, but its ears were a bit shorter. And as I did some looking into it later on, it's referred to as the jackal, which is not a good thing. So that night, getting back to my roommate, Brian, as I'm driving home after this investigation, Brian's down the road here. It's a driveway. There's like 3 houses on this side and 2 houses on this side. It used to be just one, and that was Lisa's house. And he said he was standing outside smoking, and he saw me pull in, and he saw a big black dog chasing my truck. Blew me away. I'm like, no freaking way. And he told me this like 2 weeks later. I'm like, couldn't you have told me that the night you saw it? Really weird things started to happen after that. So being a smoker, I'd go outside to smoke, and I'm smoking on the front porch. Of course, my little Lilybug has to follow me out there, and she's just, hugging onto my leg, and I'm like, you really shouldn't be out here. It's pretty cold because it's wintertime. But I want to be with you, Mama. All of a sudden, I hear this growl coming from the driveway, and I'm like, what the hell is that? I say to myself, and then I look down, and Lily's looking the same direction, like, what? And I'm like, did you hear that too? And she's like, uh-huh. I'm like, I think we better go back inside. So we did. We went back inside, and she went on to color whatever she was doing, and I was scrolling through my emails on my phone, and all of a sudden, I feel this burn on my stomach. And so I stand up and look, and there's scratches on my stomach, like right near my pants line. Start feeling really weird, like drugged or something, but I know it's not that. So I immediately go to my kit, grab my holy water in a spray bottle. Never thought that would come in handy, and sprayed it on there. And it went away pretty quickly. And then 2 nights later, I got scratched again. And like I said, it had changed, like I've been drugged or whatever. Really, really weird and woozy. And so I spray the holy water on there again. This time it took a little longer. Hey, Jay. Good to see ya. Shortly after that, this woman up the street calls me, and she's about to have a baby. And she's been having all these paranormal experiences, and she wants to have her house cleansed before the baby comes. And I try to get my crew to, come with me and do it, but nobody's available because they all had daytime jobs. I, at that point, really didn't. So I'm like, up the road, and it's right behind this church. Like, I'm pretty sure I'll be okay. Get there, generally when I pull up to a house, I immediately pick up on what's there. But whatever was there was hiding. So I go in there and I show her cleansing kit. It's got frankincense and blessed cedar from like the bear dance, and sage, all kinds of things, Palo Santo, etc. So I show her what's in the kit, and then I'm like, explaining to her how to use it. And then I go through the house and I show her, open up all the drawers, wave this in your closet, under the beds, every nook, cranny, and crevice. Like, you got to get everywhere with this stuff. This house is so full of smoke by the time I'm done. I just don't feel like I need to do anything more in order to cleanse it. And cleanse myself. Generally, after I'm done with the cleansing or even an investigation, I'll sage myself, even the bottom of my feet and stuff. But I didn't this time because I'm like, hey, I've been surrounded by smoke this whole time. It'd be fine. And of course, I wasn't really picking up on anything. Like, this thing was hiding good. And like I said, it was in the very backyard of a Catholic church. Yeah, home that night, go through the motions as far as, feeding the kids, everything. As soon as I took off my pants, which had tourmaline and selenite in my pocket, protective stones. Took off my pants, put on my jammies. Not even an hour after that, walk in, a possession, whatever was up there, took hold of me, took over me, to the point where I broke my several $1,000 camera. I threw coffee down the hallway, said some really, really hateful stuff. And when I come to, I'm stark naked behind the wheel of my car, driving towards the reservation, which is about 10 minutes away from here. Immediately turn around like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what's going on. Turn back around, go home, put my jammies back on, try to get into the bedroom, but it's locked. And I'm like, that must be for a reason. Totally understand it. So I just on the couch and watched TV till the next day. And Vern next day, instead of being pissed off or whatever, he was genuinely concerned, like, are you okay? He said, not only did my voice change, but my facial structure changed. And he knew it was not me. So learned a lesson there. And don't ever go on investigations or cleansings by yourself. There's power in numbers. Roommate Brian also saw this weird shadow thing crawl up the side of the neighbor's house and on top of the roof. He also saw, like, we've seen orbs and stuff, captured pictures of orbs in here. He saw one Christmas, like, he said it looked like tinsel. It was up on the ceiling and it was sparkling like this, and it was like tinsel, which really tripped him out. And the cat even saw it too. Like, the cat, his name was Wonky. He had a tragic death, but he ran in between my legs and was just looking out and just like looking back and forth and like following this thing around the room. Animals can pick up on some pretty interesting things. But you guys, it does look like it's the end of our time here. We have a few more seconds. But yeah, I think that was the worst thing I ever experienced. I freaking totally forgot to tell you about the shadow being that caused my second sleep paralysis. That one was so freaky. Like, when I was leaving the next day, I was looking for it in my rearview mirror, like it was going to be riding home with me. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, like, please don't be in my car. This thing I picked up or was around in Farmington, New Mexico, at a bar. I can't remember what it was called, but they had a bed house in the back there. And, me and the hubby fooled around that night or that day, and then went to take a nap, and he fell asleep right away, which he always does. But I was awake and I saw this thing in front of the light coming from under the door. There was no windows in there. But first saw it in the light there, and then saw its form like blacker than black. It was insane. I was frozen. It was speaking to me telepathically, saying it would have me. I said it wouldn't. It laughed, and when it did, I could see its sharp teeth and like the slime dripping off of it. It reached down and kissed me. Shock went through my body to my toes, and at that point, it went like from my canines down through my toes. I was able to kick my feet, and then my husband woke up and saw it and pulled me. And at that point, I was released, but it was super crazy. Anyways, you guys, maybe we'll get into some more of this next weekend during story time. But thank you so much for joining me this evening for Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I really enjoyed having you. Thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, eTalk Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time. Can't wait to do it again next weekend. We have the Paranormal Forum on the 28th. It's also a full moon, so let's see what happens then. And then we have story time with me, TessaTNT, after that. Don't forget, you guys, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media. Because without you, there is no us. Until next time, nighty night, love and light. You guys take care of my yous, and I'll see you back here. Same crazy time, same crazy place. Love and light.